How dare 18.
I know. I'll look the other way.
To examine something in Matthew chapter 5, and then we'll go to Isaiah chapter 40. What I want us to do today is to consider what some would say are oxymorons of our faith. And in Matthew chapter 5, as Jesus is beginning what we know of and what we call the Sermon on the Mount, he gives us a list that we have titled the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are filled with what one might call oxymorons. And oxymoron, these exist quite often in our faith. And really, what I mean, I felt the need to explain because I knew my kids wouldn't understand what an oxymoron is. An oxymoron is a rhetorical figure in which contradictory terms are combined. And so as we look at Matthew chapter 5, and beginning in verse 2, and he, being Jesus, opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We would think that one who would inherit the kingdom of heaven would be rich in their spiritual life. We would think that one would have a strong spiritual life if they are to inherit eternal life in the kingdom of heaven. But Jesus says, Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Another almost opposite here, an oxymoron. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. We hear today in our political realm, peace through strength. We think that the dominant nation, the strongest nation, would be the one to rule the earth. And yet Jesus says, Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. He says, Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So these are things that we would call oxymorons. Other oxymorons you're probably familiar with is the idea that we don't earn salvation. We receive it by grace as a gift of God. It is not something that we can obtain through something we've done. And yet we know that we are to live a righteous life before God. So this seems to be an oxymoron. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 25, Jesus says, For whoever would save his life must lose it. Keep that in mind. We might return to Matthew chapter 16, verse 25 before the end of today's lesson. But our belief, our faith as Christians is almost completely contrary to everything that the world we live in would teach us. The world that we live in would teach us, as I mentioned a moment ago, that the strong would rule the world. The world we live in would teach us that we need to save our life in order to keep it. That's different, completely different. Now go back to Isaiah chapter 40 for a moment. Most of our time this evening will be spent in the book of Isaiah chapter 40. And just to give you a little bit of background, the first 39 chapters of the book of Isaiah are basically dire warnings for a people who have abandoned God. They are dire warnings of the consequences of living life as if God does not exist. And such was the plight of the children of Israel, and quite frankly, I believe such is the plight of the world we live in today. Most of the world around us lives life as if God does not exist. And so when Isaiah begins the 40th chapter, he changes pace. And he changes pace and he writes words of comfort for those who do still believe in God. Isaiah has prophesied the destruction of God's people. Isaiah has prophesied years before it would happen the carrying off into captivity of Babylon and utter destruction of the nation of Israel. But now in chapter 40, Isaiah writes the words of comfort and strength for those who are carried off into captivity. You remember Daniel, reading the book of Daniel through. Daniel is a young man, probably somewhere around, if my memory is right, somewhere around 17 years old. He's a teenager. He's carried off into captivity along with others by the name of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into a fiery furnace. Their punishment for not worshiping the king, but bowing only to the God of heaven. Their punishment for their faith was to be bound hand and foot and burned by fire. It is my belief that Daniel had a vast knowledge and understanding, as did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of the book of Isaiah. In fact, both Isaiah and Jeremiah prophesied that Israel will be in captivity for 70 years. And we see at the end of the book of Daniel, he recognizes the time is at hand for God's people to be set free. That tells me that Daniel had a vast understanding and knowledge of the promises of God. And it is inconceivable in my mind that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not know full well what Isaiah writes from chapter 40 on, the encouragement for those who remain faithful. If you go down in Isaiah chapter 40, begin with me in verse 28. Isaiah says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint nor grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint." Now that might seem like an oxymoron. Power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. The idea here that I think is such an oxymoron is the idea of waiting on God. And I want us to discuss what it means to wait on God.